How Henry Ford actually built the modern world. The untold story of the Model T. Truly understand the magnitude of the Ford Model T. One must first step back into the muddy, unpaved reality of the early 20th century. In 1900, the automobile was a curiosity, a noisy plaything reserved exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. They were custom-built, finicky machines that cost the equivalent of several years' wages for the average worker. For the vast majority of the human population, life was limited to the distance a horse could travel in a day. The world was local, static, and disconnected. Then came a man with a polarizing personality and a singular vision. Henry Ford did not invent the automobile, nor did he invent the assembly line. But he was the architect who synthesized these concepts into a force that would shatter the status quo. He declared, "I will build a car for the great multitude." At the time, this sounded like lunacy. Today, we know it as the dawn of the modern era. This is the story of the Model T, the car that put the world on wheels. Part 1. The engineering of simplicity. The first Model T rolled out of the Piquette Avenue plant in Detroit on October 1, 1908. It looked deceptively simple. However, its design was a masterclass in practical engineering. Ford's previous attempts at car making had failed or resulted in vehicles that were too expensive. With the Model T, he focused on durability and utility. The secret weapon of the Model T was vanadium steel. During a race in 1905, Ford had examined the wreckage of a French race car and noticed the steel was lighter yet stronger than anything American steelmakers were producing. He brought a metallurgist on board and began using this alloy for the Model T. This made the car incredibly tough, but light enough to navigate the atrocious roads of rural America. It weighed only 1,200 pounds, but could withstand punishment that would destroy a modern SUV. Under the hood sat a 2.9-liter, four-cylinder engine generating 20 horsepower. It wasn't a speed demon. Top speed was around 40 to 45 miles per hour, but it was torquey and reliable. The transmission was a planetary gear system, operated by pedals rather than a hand shifter. This made it easier to drive for people who had never operated machinery before. It was designed to be repaired by a farmer with a wrench and a pair of pliers. It was the universal car, adaptable to any need. From hauling hay to powering a sawmill. Part 2. The moving assembly line, while the car itself was a marvel. The process used to build it was the real revolution. In the early years, teams of mechanics would move around a stationary car, building it piece by piece. It was slow and inefficient. Ford was obsessed with efficiency. He looked at meatpacking plants in Chicago, where carcasses moved on overhead trolleys, while butchers performed single, repetitive cuts. He asked, what if we did this in reverse? In 1913, at his new Highland Park plant, Ford introduced the moving assembly line. The results were immediate and staggering. A chassis was pulled along by a rope and later a chain conveyor, and workers stood in fixed stations. Adding specific parts as the car passed by. The impact on time management was unprecedented in human history. Before the line, it took approximately 12 hours to assemble a Model T chassis. With the moving line, that time dropped to 1 hour and 33 minutes. This drastic reduction in labor hours meant Ford could produce cars faster than anyone else in the world. By 1920, a new Ford Model T was rolling off the line every 24 seconds. Part 3. The economics of scale and the $5 day. The brilliance of Henry Ford lay in his understanding of economics. Conventional business wisdom dictated that to maximize profit, one should keep wages low and prices high. Ford inverted this logic. Because the assembly line allowed him to produce so many cars, he could afford to lower the price. In 1908, the Model T cost $850, roughly $25,000 today. By 1916, The price had dropped $360. By 1925, it was $260. Suddenly, the car wasn't just for the rich. It was for the school teacher, the factory worker, and the farmer. However, the assembly line had a dark side. The work was monotonous, repetitive, and soul-crushing. Turnover was incredibly high. Ford had to hire hundreds of men just to keep 100 on the line. In January 1914, Ford dropped a bombshell that shook the industrial world. He doubled the daily wage of his workers to $5 per day and reduced the workday. From 9 hours to 8. Critics called him a socialist and predicted his bankruptcy. They were wrong. The $5 day solved the turnover problem, attracting the best mechanics in the country. More importantly, it created a new class of consumers. Ford's own workers could now afford the very product they were building. This created a virtuous cycle of consumption and production that became the blueprint for the American middle class. Part 4. Changing the landscape. The proliferation of the Model T forced the world to change physically. In 1908, there were hardly any paved roads outside of major cities. As millions of Model Ts flooded the country, the demand for better infrastructure skyrocketed. The Federal Aid Road Act of 1916 was passed largely due to the pressure of the motoring public. Muddy tracks became paved highways. The car also changed the geography of living. Before the Model T, people lived near where they worked or near a train station. With a car, a worker could live miles away from the factory in a cleaner, quieter environment. This gave birth to the suburb. It altered social dynamics as well. Rural families were no longer isolated. Farmers could drive to town for supplies or entertainment. The Sunday drive became an American institution. Culturally, it sparked a revolution in autonomy. Young people found a new sense of freedom, away from the watchful eyes of chaperones in the parlor, fundamentally changing courtship and dating rituals. The car became a symbol of personal liberty, a core tenet of the American identity that persists to this day. Part 5. Any color as long as it's black. There is a famous myth that Henry Ford said, "You can have any color as long as it's black." This is only partially true. In the early years, the Model T was available in red, gray, and green. However, as the assembly line speed increased, the drying time of the paint became a bottleneck. From 1914 to 1926, the Model T was indeed only available in black because Japan black enamel was the only paint that dried fast enough to keep up with the line. It was a decision driven purely by efficiency. This stubborn adherence to standardization eventually became Ford's Achilles heel. By the mid-1920s, the market was shifting. General Motors, led by Alfred P. Sloan, began offering cars in various colors with more modern features and annual model updates. Customers were willing to pay a little more for style and comfort. Henry Ford despised these cosmetic changes, believing the Model T was the perfect car. He refused to innovate for too long. Part 6. The End of an Era and the Legacy. By 1927, sales were plummeting. The Model T, once the bleeding edge of technology, was now a dinosaur. It lacked hydraulic brakes, it was loud, and it was rough. Reluctantly, Henry Ford shut down the production line in May 1927 to retool for his next car, the Model A, but the legacy of the Model T had already been cemented. Over 15 million units had been sold. It had essentially taught Americans how to drive. It had spurred the oil industry, the rubber industry, and the glass industry. It had created the concept of the gas station and the roadside diner. More than just a vehicle. The Ford Model T was a catalyst. It represented the shift from an agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse. It proved that high wages and low prices could coexist through mass production. It shrank the world, making the distance between cities feel smaller and the opportunities for the average person feel larger. Conclusion: looking back at the Ford Model T today, it appears antiquated, a quaint relic of a bygone era with its skinny tires and brass lamps. Yet, its DNA is in every vehicle on the road today. The manufacturing principles used to build it are still the foundation of global industry, from smartphones to sneakers. Henry Ford's Model T did not just transport bodies. It transported the human race into the future. It was the physical embodiment of the idea that technology should serve the many, not the few. When we look at the Model T, we aren't just looking at a car. We are looking at the machine that constructed the modern world. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, learned something new, or simply want to see more content like this, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps the channel grow and reach more people. And if you have thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.